Welcome to Rainbow Speaks, Rainbow Stage's first and only official Rainbow Stage podcast.
I am your host, Cuinn Joseph.
I am your other host, Cuinn Joseph.
We are not related.
Stop. We are related. You said this every single time.
Cuinn. Over the last few podcasts, we've talked about all of your successes.
Yeah.
You bought a car. You started a new job as a teacher at an undisclosed school.
Yeah, I have not revealed the school and I won't, just in case.
I would like to...
No.
You got engaged. You bought a house.
Yeah.
What about me?
What about you? What's going on in your life? Do you want to talk about successes? Is that what this is? See, it seems like I'm going to ask you and you don't have anything.
I made a delicious pasta meal last night, and I was pretty proud of it, and I had some for lunch today, and it held me over until now. I forgot to eat dinner, so I will get a little rumbly-tumbly as we go along tonight.
Daphne will cut that out, don't worry. We do have a segment coming up called Tummy Mike, where it's just a check-in on how hungry everyone is based on their gurgles. That's good.
But yeah, so we're kind of equal in the exciting things happening department.
Yeah, big news on both ends. What do you say?
Let's get speaking.
Today's topic is old versus new. The golden age of musical theater, that is 1943 to 1964, saw some of the biggest smash hits in all of Broadway history. All the way from Oklahoma to Fiddler on the Roof, so many classic musicals premiered and stole the hearts of countless audiences everywhere, solidifying them as timeless classics, right?
Not entirely. Ironically, like any art, some of these timeless classics don't actually stand the test of time. Through a modern 2022 lens, things created in the 20th century are often full of pesky misogyny, racism, and anti-LGBTQ language, among other largely problematic topics. Yet, some of these musicals are still revived over and over and over. Oklahoma, Guys and Dolls, Showboat, West Side Story. All of these shows have been revived at least 5 times since their premieres, sometimes for runs longer than their original ones.
So clearly there's still a market for these shows, in spite of some of those problematic themes and topics. But is that a good thing? Do these revivals of classic shows perpetuate problematic topics? Do they prevent new, more progressive work from seeing the light of day? Or do they sell tickets and keep the theater industry alive? Well, we had these questions, and here to discuss these exact questions and more, we have 2 experts on all things musical theater. Please welcome Paul DeGurse and Jillian Willems.
Hi, everybody. Oh,
Welcome.
my gosh. Experts.
That's a very generous thing to say. Wow.
Don't worry, I'll take it again. Please welcome a couple of schmoes.
That's more like
I feel
it.
much more comfortable with that.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here. Who are you? Tell us why you're here and what you do in theater and in life.
I'm Paul, Kara. I'm here because you guys asked me to be.
Shoot.
Asked him to be.
My name is Paul DeGurse. I, for the past 12 years or so, have worked as a professional music director and conductor of musical theater productions. Also do some composition and sound design. I've been lucky enough to work all over the country at various professional theaters around the country. And I'm also an arts administrator where I'm one of the founders and one of the employees at the Village Conservatory for Music Theater.
Woo-woo.
And how did you find theater?
Kind of a lucky flip of the coin more than anything. I was a university student at the U of M studying jazz piano. And on my summer break after my second year of university, a close friend of mine asked me if I would music direct a musical in the Fringe Festival.
Oh, wow.
And I said yes, and I really was attracted to the collaborative nature of the work, the interdisciplinary collaborative nature of the work. And it also seemed like a market in Winnipeg that could use my skills and talents. So I thought, well, let's jump on it. Let's make it happen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jillian Willems. I consider myself a person of many hats in the theater community
For those
here.
listening
You are
on
made
audio.
of many hats.
Yes.
Oh,
Or,
I'm
or do you wear them?
wearing
For those who are listening, Jill's wearing like 8 hats.
So
like,
many.
Yeah, it's like bowler, cowboy. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But
they're all leaning.
And they all say a different thing that I'm about to list.
That's
so
so impressive. It's a lot that you brought that in here today, but I'm so happy.
Thank you so much for having all my hats here. So I am a director, choreographer, performer, educator. Yeah.
That's no question mark needed.
Educator, period. And I, like Paul, have been at it for about probably just over a decade, 10, maybe 12 years now, professionally. I am an artistic associate at the Village Conservatory, and Paul and I co-host a podcast called...
What? There's more?
Hang on.
There are other
Duchess
podcasts.
Daphne,
Wow.
why didn't you tell us this?
Yeah, you said this was the first official anything podcast.
The only podcast.
Yeah.
Ever made. We co-host Monkeys and Playbills.
A podcast about Broadway musicals that had runs of 100 shows or fewer.
And what the heck happened?
They're pitching their...
Today.
That was really good.
We
Just
did
wait,
our
we need to
research.
take some notes.
Yeah. But we do plugs at the end.
So cool at you
Cut
two.
that out. Just bleep over it. No, that sounds awesome.
And what brought you to theater?
Oh gosh. Well, when I was 6 or 7, Rainbow Stage was putting on a production of The Sound of Music. Up until that point, my introduction to musical theater had been through film. A Chorus Line was big in my house. Wizard of Oz. Yeah, just like through cinema. That was how I received musical theater in the beginning.
So cool. What's very cool to me about that specifically is everybody, when film is their introduction to musical theater, they default Disney. And that's very interesting that you immediately were like, no, it's like these.
Oh yeah, no,
Theater.
I'm
Theater,
pretty
yeah.
sure that A Chorus Line was like incredibly formative for even the style of dance that I tend to gravitate toward when I'm teaching or choreographing, that like really like athletic 80s, like late 70s, early 80s style of jazz movement. So yeah.
I mean, we're so glad to have you both because as we cheekily asked in our opening, are these old shows good? Are they valuable to have going, especially when they're not necessarily progressive by today's standards?
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge question.
Oh, we're going to break it down to smaller questions.
Oh, okay, good.
Little itty bitty guys.
Little bitty questions that are easily digestible.
Like, let's just jump in with,
Yeah.
Are there golden age classic works that you consider timeless or that hold a special place in your heart?
Absolutely. Even just hearing Jill talk about A Chorus Line, which I know doesn't fall into the strictly defined golden age,
Yeah, I
but
mean,
would
let's
absolutely
expand
is
it. Yeah.
the, is the
little
broader
bit.
canon. Things like The Sound of Music, many Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, many Cole Porter shows, many shows from the turn of the 20th century, from like your Kurt Weils or something,
Right.
are very valuable to study, not only as academic texts so we can understand where this art form came from and where it's going next, but also, in my opinion, still have a lot of weight and have a lot to say about the world as it exists today.
I struggle, I think, with this. And each day I probably, or depending on each musical or composer's like body of work, I have a different feeling about each show.
Yeah.
I think as 21st century folks, we're living in this world today and we can look back on things fondly with nostalgia, but maybe we don't necessarily still need those narratives because there are other shows currently that are telling these stories better in ways that maybe we didn't have the language at the time, maybe we didn't have the context at the time. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, especially doing our podcast. It's a question that comes up a lot.
Right.
And then when we talk about revivals, it comes up a lot too.
So, to you, is there, this is not to for clickbait or cancellation purposes, to be clear, is there a show that like sticks out to you as really internally contradictory where it's like, I love it, but...
Yes, but I want to be very cautious about what the but is. I love it, but the music is quite dated. I love it, but the narrative style is something that no longer really holds my attention. A few years ago, I worked on a production of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht's Three Penny Opera.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful show. It's an important show. The music, the text, all really, in my opinion, things that still can hold a lot of weight today. So I would say I like the Three Penny Opera, but it's a really tough one to program these days just for audiences, including myself, to actually experience because of its length and the way that it's structured.
Right.
Totally.
Those kind of challenges are things that I'm okay with.
Yeah, like there's shows where I wonder if it's like necessary that we do them in their entirety.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot about South Pacific. Orchestrally, it's stunning and gorgeous, and I would love to hear an orchestra play this music.
Yeah.
But do we need the whole thing?
The like heroic moment of some of those shows, or like the big aha for Nelly in that show is, like I'm tolerant of,
Yes,
like it never even gets to a
like-
point of I was so wrong. It's like I can swallow
I
this
can
pill.
let this go.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
and to be clear for audiences at home who don't know South Pacific, the two leads fall in love, but it turns out that Emil, the male lead of the show, has two, I guess, vaguely Polynesian children, or half Polynesian children, and Nelly, upon finding this out, is a little bit taken aback and a bit, how would you describe... You've played the role.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Based on having played this role, I would say there's this like inner turmoil for her because she's not actually worldly. She's not a person who has met or interacted with people with different perspectives or different life experience. And so I feel like she has a more narrow view. And the way that manifests is fear for her. And I think then the fear becomes anger and all of the different manifestations of that. But I think what you're hinting at is the fact that we don't get the resolution that's actually necessary to see what that change was. It's just sort of like, I guess I'll do it because I love this man.
And yes,
Yeah.
and that's and to be clear, that's also maybe necessary now because at the
Right.
time, groundbreaking,
That's
sometimes
progressive. That's
like
crazy.
multiple times banned in different theaters and states wouldn't do it on
That's
touring
right.
shows. I won a Pulitzer Prize for exactly this reason of its like progress that it was making in terms of the idea of like interracial relations and those kinds of things. And so it's really interesting that something so progressive that it was illegal
Right.
in some places by today's standards, it makes our skin crawl sometimes.
Yep.
I'm really glad that you said that. I agree completely. It's really fascinating that we've brought up South Pacific this soon in the podcast because South Pacific is a piece that is textually explicitly anti-racist.
Yeah.
Right.
It has
Yes.
a song
Isn't
that
that
is
wild?
which is so it's impossible to argue that, but it's also impossible to argue that it stands up these days
Right,
without,
yeah.
like you said, making your skin crawl with how insensitive the depictions of various relations between people of different races are.
Yes.
But to me, South Pacific is kind of the shining example of, is there a point in doing it anymore?
Do you think it's the easiest one for us to remember because it was so...
Absolutely. It was so celebrated for its
Yes.
progressive nature.
Yeah.
Right.
And it plays so not that now.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen with Next to Normal or
Yeah.
Hamilton
I
or
think
what
there are
have
a
you,
lot
right?
of modern musicals that are going to fall into the same
Yeah.
thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
Avenue Q's taken that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Super
yeah,
has.
like right, like pretty
Absolutely.
quickly.
And
So quickly.
and that's another one for me that's like I love it, but I don't want to ever. I don't think I want to see it performed ever
No.
now.
Yes.
I'm gonna listen to it in the privacy of my own home.
Do you have a show that comes to mind as like, I love it, but?
Like Dogfight, for example, is like a really it's a great listen. I don't necessarily love the show in its totality, but it's a great listen. But it's also like very gross, and
Oh, yeah.
and you don't get the payoff in that show that you would want by a modern standard. I know that's another quite modern example though. So it's
Yeah,
kind
that's
of,
only like
think-
10 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah, and I think it's happening faster and faster now that these shows can just be like that one little thing that makes you go, is it necessary that we analyze it that hard too? I don't know.
I think it is. As creators of theater in whatever aspect, in whether we're writing, directing, performing, and producing, have a responsibility to the audience, to the people receiving the show, to do no harm. Applies to physical harm, obviously, if it would be the worst thing in the world if an audience member got hurt at a show. But that also applies to mental or emotional anguish. And so I think if there's a possibility that the content of a show, if it's not trying to like specifically explore this this idea,
Right.
I guess what I'm trying to say is in the case of something like an Avenue Q or something, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that our jokes especially, but the content of our shows in general, is not causing harm to someone who's watching it, especially to people, to demographics, folks of color, folks of from different marginalized communities who we really want to welcome into the theater.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge goal that most theaters make explicit and that we as artists have had deep in our hearts for years.
And can you imagine like a show like Avenue Q being your only avenue into getting into theater?
Right.
You're
Well,
like,
exactly.
okay, I guess I'm going to be Gary Coleman now.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
And you've done some harm.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because my all-time thing that got me into musical theater is Book of Mormon.
Yes.
My brother literally got the soundtrack for Christmas one year.
Listening to it, falling asleep, and
Yeah.
just like
Oh,
having
yeah.
it ringing in my
Yeah.
head as you
Oh,
guys were
yeah.
like laughing.
Yep. Over and over and over. We listened to
Yeah.
that show so
Absolutely.
much. Our dad's favorite show is The Sound of Music, and so watching that movie for me was falling asleep. That was my sort of introduction to musical theater, and so I really didn't find a way in. But I really loved comedy, and I loved that kind of thing. And while I wasn't even into like South Park specifically, and I think a lot of people felt really blindsided by here's a brand new way we can tell story in a really traditional format or in a really traditional structure. While some of the representation is sort of, there's both sides getting made fun of, but largely the representation for people of color in that show is like the butt of a joke. In sort of a like, let's reduce what it is to be Ugandan specifically in this show. I still love it, and the jokes hold up, and
I think I would still kind of want to be in the show in a way.
Sure.
But maybe that's more of a nostalgic piece than of like, should I be in the show?
totally.
Yeah.
But then you also kind of have to think it was written by two white guys.
Well, that's the other
So-
thing is like right away, two white guys and Bobby Lopez like doesn't do enough necessarily to tell an authentically Ugandan perspective.
talking about?
Yeah, I know, right?
Who decides what stays and what goes? How do we choose? Like, if we decide South Pacific is a show that we should still tell, is it appropriate to modify the show, or should it exist as it is because it existed as it was for that time and it means so much?
I don't think the show should be modified in any way. I think, just like I don't think that we should ever forget what South Pacific, for example, did, the good that it did.
Yeah.
Because it did plenty of good. If you have to start having the conversation about, man, we really have to modify this show,
Just write a new
find
show.
a new show, man. It's not like there's a lack of artists out there looking for work. You know what I mean?
Yep. We know that it exists. We have evidence of that work. We can listen back to it to get an idea of what was going on at the time. I think that's a wonderful gift that we have with recordings and with access to scripts and things like that, and lots of interviews with people over the years. But I start to wonder if it's like, is there a story that is new that tells us the same thing better?
People are doing a more nuanced, more appropriate modern look at the exact same content, the exact same themes.
Absolutely.
But then they stop selling tickets. And there's the other sometimes gross piece is we are in an industry that is really subsidized grant-based work. And so any time to earn revenue is a big deal. And these shows earn revenue because people recognize them.
I think a lot of companies have felt like in order to maintain their level of production, however many shows they decide to do in a season, they need to have one or two big
That
sellers.
are
Yeah.
for their subscriber
Right.
base specifically, and it's not really about bringing in new people to see the show. It's about sustaining the money makers, essentially.
If it's actually true that everyone else loves it, then absolutely program away. I sometimes get very frustrated with the idea that theater companies exist to exist. We are non-profit charitable organizations.
Yes.
And that's not just a tax status, that's a responsibility.
Yeah, right.
That responsibility is serve your mandate, serve your mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, with a revival of a show at the regional level, I have trouble understanding how it actually serves.
Yeah.
What does that show do to impact your community
Exactly.
at this point in time?
Yeah.
Can I ask this? And maybe this is from the perspective of somebody. I often fail to hold a lot of nostalgia for a lot of things in general. People look at that and they're like, yeah, I know it's not great, but I still can't help but love it. I'm very much a person who's like, I know it's not great, so I don't like it anymore.
Right,
Who does it serve is a really great question. And part of me thinks that, honestly, people like it because they think they're supposed to like it.
It just makes me think, like, about how the legacy of these shows have been upheld.
And it's also interesting the way that the youth really grasp onto musical theater now. It's almost like it's very defining for them. And I wonder how that, like, as shows age, like I think of a show like Dear Evan Hansen. I think the music in that show is beautiful. What?
Yeah.
Why does it exist?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is
Absolutely.
insane.
Yeah.
Sorry to the Dear Evan Hansen stans out there, but
Dear Evan
oh my
Stanson.
Yeah.
But I think that show to me has aged poorly, but I think so many people still love it. And it's
easily.
how long has it existed? 5 years?
And like I was so excited about it. So it's a different time.
It's interesting to me to see the way young people are consuming theater now, and I wonder if that'll build a new subscriber base in a way.
I'll tell you, it won't if we keep on programming Golden Age shows, you know?
Yeah.
Real
Totally,
talk.
yes.
Like, oh, you like Dear Evan Hansen? Here's Oklahoma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
And there's,
no.
you know, like anyone who says that musical theater as an art form is dying is talking out of their ass. That's not true,
totally.
just like what you
Yeah.
just said. But there's also no question that the way we're presenting it right now isn't necessarily resonating with the people that we want to be seeing these shows. Or to be coming to the theater, rather, I should say.
Yeah.
So I think that absolutely there's currently a new canon being created. I would even go so far as to say we're in the middle of a new golden age of musical theater.
Yeah.
The amount of innovation that's being done right now
For sure.
is incredible. We have to actually start paying attention to it as a wider community, as an outside New York community at some point. And by paying attention to it, I mean actually investing artistically in either these shows or in other creators who are on that cutting edge.
We have been talking about a lot of musicals that exist within a pretty specific framework. There have been a few musicals that have started from concept albums, like we've got Jagged Little Pill, which is on Broadway now. The way that we create and present musicals, I think, is changing now at a rate that it hasn't, probably.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exciting and an opportunity for us to not only expand the subscriber base, because I think that's a byproduct of introducing and supporting creative endeavors like that are more original. It's exciting because it allows for a variety of stories, perspectives, experiences, and mediums even.
Which I was going to talk about earlier because you had mentioned the idea of do no harm. I think it's a really simultaneously important rule to follow and sometimes to break. And I will preface this by just saying,
Okay.
so for example, has anybody here listened to A Strange Loop?
Yes, love it. Yes.
Absolutely one of the most brilliant pieces of art I have ever seen / heard. And in terms of like content and language, there is room for harm to be done.
Yeah.
And I understand the perspective is very specific and very niche, and like if there is a person who to be using any of that wide variety of specific language and whatever and experience, it's Michael R. Jackson. And so there's something interesting about pushing boundaries in new ways that is like that show is never going to be mainstream for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
But listen to it. If you're a lover of musical theater, like it is really brilliant on so many levels. But simultaneously, I guarantee you'll get uncomfortable right away, and then more uncomfortable, and then so uncomfortable sometimes that you'll be like, oh, they can do this, like you can do this in a show. Yeah, apparently you can, and do it really, really well. This isn't to say that there's no intention of harm, obviously, and more importantly, I think that harm being defined as an intentional act of something. Now, I don't believe that unintentional ignorance is also okay when it's harmful. What I do think is like pushing boundaries is really important.
Right.
And being uncomfortable, I always use this phrase like an ideal situation for me is theater that makes that we're all comfortable being uncomfortable. So that like there's it's safe. I tell this to my students all the time, but it's like that's my ideal situation. It's not that we're all just like happy
doing this.
Nobody's feeling uncomfortable. Because I don't think we can learn as easily in that state. But I do like a situation where you start to get vulnerable, and then you maybe have like emotions come up, but you don't feel the need to fight them for the sake of, mitigating any problems because that situation is comfortable. So for me, when I define safe space, that's really what I mean.
Cool.
It's not safe where there's like no room for discomfort. There's lots of room for discomfort, in fact, but in a nicer way.
I think
Right.
I think that's fantastic, Cuinn. I think and it's an important distinction to
Yes,
make. I agree completely. Could it be amended from do no harm to be very cognizant of the potential for harm that you're causing?
Of course.
Because I'm like, you're absolutely right. Discomfort and the potential to discuss challenging topics is essential
Yeah.
Yep.
to live performance, to theater as an art form. I guess being aware of the direction you're punching more than anything. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like Strange Loop punches in a big hug of a
Yes, it
let's
does.
all feel
It-
weird about this together.
Yeah, it's like there's a fist coming from the stomach outward.
Yeah.
And then it wraps its arm
Like
right back
alien.
around you.
Whereas like Book of Mormon, that punch goes in a weird direction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I
Totally.
don't.
Yep.
And that's where the potential is to cause harm. That someone will come in
Totally.
and feel the alienation of in that intent,
Yeah.
rather than feel the wonderful sense of community that you get from exploring a difficult subject with other people who get it.
Right.
And I think that it ultimately comes down to timeline of when it took place, because
Absolutely.
in that era, only time quite like that you would see that many black people on stage was Lion King, probably.
Yeah.
Like
Porgy and Bess.
Porgy.
yeah.
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 But that's got a whole bunch of stuff.
So, but there's something interesting in like that perspective. Sometimes representation was the hump to get over.
Yep.
But I also think now we're very over it.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we can start looking past it and have loftier goals.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely.
Totally. I hope so, at least.
Talked about, we're going to remount this thing, but what about a revival, like a Broadway revival of, I don't know, Funny Girl? It's just obviously has been the talk of the town over the last few months, and thoughts come to mind, I'm sure, for you.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I've discovered in the last couple of years of having biweekly chats with Paul is that it seems, and I'm not in the room with these producers, so I don't know for sure, but I get the impression that they don't have that initial discussion together, which is like, what should we revive? It seems like things are very much passion projects funded by the money that they have, and not at all like examining under the lens of like, what would be the value of reviving this thing right now? What message does it tell us present day that is maybe different from original? I don't know. I really struggle with that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's at the very least explicitly the case with Funny Girl.
If I think of Anything Goes in the Sutton Foster revival, I love Sutton Foster so much.
Oh, yeah.
And I would watch her do Anything Goes every single day.
Yep.
But I think it's only revived because of Sutton Foster.
Yep.
Cole Porter's incredible, but like not for $150, you know?
Right,
Exactly, exactly.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, like, were they talking about what is this story going to tell us
Yeah.
that is really special and important to address?
Or were
today?
they like, we've got two stars that are ready to hit the Broadway stage again after COVID, and like we need to make something happen?
Yes.
Then counterpoint, consider like the Fiddler revival with the Yiddish text, or also semi-recently the revival of Once on This Island, not a super old show, but like a revival that happened a few years ago that kind of became the definitive version of that show, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And I think those revivals very clearly speak to a lot of forethought and a lot of people asking, why are we doing this?
Yes.
Right.
West Side, the movie version is another good example
Yeah.
of that. Of
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
And the revival of that where they use Spanish,
Yeah.
where Lin-Manuel wrote the Spanish lyrics.
Yeah.
That's one of the best scores in the
course.
20th
It's
century of any
great.
kind of music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, maybe it's time to not do West Side Story anymore. Just maybe it is. Like, there's no art that's that good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once again, if it's punching wrong, if it's causing harm, in my opinion, there's no argument to be made that there's art good enough to cause harm to people.
can I drop a big bomb on you?
Always.
Shakespeare. I truly love Shakespeare, but I also grew to love Shakespeare. Like, there's lots of offensive Shakespeare.
Absolutely.
You know, like Merchant of Venice,
Yeah.
Othello. Throughout a lot of the plays, like, the anti-Semitism runs rampant.
Yep.
And yet, we've decided societally, whether you agree or not, or I agree or not, that this is theater so good that it it literally can withstand anything. There's no version of canceling Shakespeare, but at least in terms of even like removing the prominence of Shakespeare from the world, can't happen.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so my question there is it because a little bit is tradition for tradition's sake, or is it because somebody was actually so brilliant they did something that we have not replicated to that level before? The audience doesn't understand like 97% of the stuff you say.
Yeah.
So much of it is physical and whatnot. But the writing in like iambic pentameter and in poetry in that way is something we actually haven't really touched too much, not since then, because his contemporaries obviously did, but in a modern world we don't. But there's something really transfixing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the musicality
There's
of it?
whatever
Yeah.
it is, it's like listening to spoken word poetry to me, where it's just more interesting than like somebody giving a speech about that same topic.
Right.
I think it's part of what made Hamilton so successful was not just the hip hop, but all the language. In fact, that's my biggest comparison to something like Hamlet. From Hamlet to now is something like Hamilton, where everything, and I think Hadestown to some extent as well, there's so much poetry in just the language of how they do any of the dialogue as well, that you're still transfixed by it. And sometimes you don't quite understand what's being said or whatever it is, but you want to listen to it.
Yeah, you're with it.
Yeah. Shakespeare doesn't need to exist, because certainly the themes of Shakespeare have been covered time and time and time again in much more nuanced, much more progressive ways, because it was 1500. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's...
And please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that older pieces should not be performed. I agree 100% with the merits of Shakespeare that you just described really succinctly. But I think if one of those pieces if it is something like The Merchant of Venice, that had just an outrageously offensive by our modern standards caricature, nothing's good enough to get past that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe we do have to enter into a conversation about whether The Merchant of Venice is something that should be produced on professional stages anymore, or whether it should exist as something we can study academically without necessarily presenting it as a commercial product.
Yeah.
Right.
I kind of agree with that, but there's something sad about like putting things in the vault to never be presented again, even if I don't want to see it. I know exactly what you there's
mean.
something about it being like, so no one will ever perform. And there are certain shows that I'm like, I really don't think they should be performed. I almost can't get on board with them never being performed, even though I don't think they should. I don't know what that is.
I often wonder, because there's the question of like harmful content that can be modified perhaps, but if it's ingrained in the story, it's like another conversation entirely. We've seen it happen in a few musicals where it's used to like solve the mystery that was going on, and it's like it's just like that. Okay, let's just put that to bed.
Yeah.
We don't need that. But if it's like there's maybe some language that could be revised for present, but the story could still be told, I don't know. Separating that is hard.
I do have a question for people who do feel like it's weird to put things to bed. Is there a part of it that is the fear of losing the legacy of Shakespeare, or losing the legacy of Rodgers and Hammerstein, like because they're such important figures, or have we been told that legacy matters?
Yes. What a good question. I'm not convinced that by presenting Rodgers and Hammerstein at a major regional level, they were actually doing anything substantial to further their legacy. The people who would actually further that legacy aren't going to see it. People who are already in on it, who are going to see it. And I'm not saying put it in the vault. There's a middle ground between it gets programmed every 2 years and it's never heard from again. You know what I mean? There's a wide middle ground there.
What?
And it almost makes you wonder, in 50 years, like, is Hamilton going to hold that place that South Pacific holds now?
It's hard to say,
What a
because
wild thing to think about.
Right.
if I'm critically analyzing it, it's so easy to point at what a glorification of a bunch of slavers.
Absolutely.
Like it's easy by today's standards.
Yeah.
But God, is it transcendental like it is? It's like,
Yes, you do.
it's so
like South
good.
Pacific, it is an example of virtuosic writing in this style.
Yeah.
It's just flawlessly, effortlessly virtuosic.
Yeah. You mentioned like Hamilton as like an example of a pickup of Shakespeare from a text perspective. Do we think there's a pickup of like composition of Rodgers and Hammerstein, that someone else that has picked up and run with that style, so that we are maybe remembering that it exists, but like
that's
flipping the script a little
and
bit.
that's just the way art moves, right? That's the evolution of art and the way you want it to move. And I would say that Lin-Manuel, you can, at the very least, you can see in his pieces the Rodgers and Hammerstein Golden Age influence very clearly.
Yeah.
By modern version, do we mean writing in the same style? Like the same style of music?
I think we just don't hear it now.
Well, because
Yeah,
that's just the way that music evolves.
Like, is
right?
anybody orchestrating in a similar way? Is anyone pulling melodically from those? Like, it makes me wonder about legacy in just a different way.
I would say like the more direct thing to me is like Sondheim to Lin-Manuel Miranda. If you're talking about like cutting quick paste lyrics stuff, like that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
But and you can also do the jump from like Rodgers and Hammerstein to Sondheim really easily, obviously, based on their history. Yeah.
I think new musicals are being influenced by the new audiences that are taking them in,
As well
and
they
they like what's going on now.
Yeah.
They like this new stuff,
Right.
and so it's sort of hard to go back to, because you see so many people who just want a belt, and that's like and it's like
Yes.
I get it. It's fun.
Yep.
One of the things I love the most about music and art, and just the creation of art, and about musical theater specifically, because it's a confluence of different disciplines. One of the things I like the most is seeing the different ways and permutations that we use all these tools in our toolbox. I really like Rodgers and Hammerstein music, and I love that style of singing, a more legit style of singing, and I'd be very excited to see a new piece that kind of embraced those styles. I'm even more excited to see pieces that take parts of that and parts of other stuff and create something kind of new and cool.
Yes.
And yes, that is kind of sad that maybe some stuff gets left by the wayside. It's never gone. You know what I mean? Nothing ever disappears.
I love that idea in like a cultural sense as well.
Yes.
And I think that's
Absolutely.
like ultimately I want a world, if I describe utopia, to me it is exactly that. The same way that we're pulling from like eras and different genres and whatever. That's or my best argument for why should everybody be exposed to everybody is exactly that. Is like the more echo chamber we are in like our artistic world where it's just these old things, and that's what theater is. Anything monolithic is not good. But like the more we learn from all of them, the closer we are to some greater thing.
Well, I mean, again, this whole conversation has been revolving around theater in a very Western lens, and what that golden age is a very narrow thing that we're looking at, and what theater can be in the future is so much more than even what it is now.
Absolutely. For that reason, especially, that's the reason we don't vault shows either. Because then we're just in an echo chamber in the other direction. You have to learn. You have to study. And, sometimes you have to take some personal responsibility. We need to take some personal responsibility as artists and creators. If the show's not on the stage, we can study up and know that South Pacific is important and go check it out and learn from it and grow from it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The show's not gone if it's not on the stage in front of us.
Yeah.
Because you are deciding what the public is consuming, and that can do more harm than good.
There just needs to be a lot of thought, the consideration that you said when it comes to which way you're punching, and what does your programming actually say.
The most cynical version of programming is looking at audience members as commodities who will pay money, and which show will get the most people in there. And I think we as artists owe it to our community to show more care than that. What will enhance our community? What will serve our community?
Well, it's shifting that perspective that the theater is not just an entertainment venue, but a community space for audiences and artists and your outside community who may not be involved in theater, and what the impact, what that ripple effect can be on, and it starts with what you're programming, because that's the most impact that's going to happen.
Yes.
I'm also seeing a huge surgence in like the nomadic companies, the ones that don't have their own theater. They're creating really wonderful work, sort of like that independent plus company. An expansion from 5 names is really good, and that's also where you're going to, if anyone's ever going to start creating something. I don't know if in Winnipeg we could ever get a Strange Loop, but creating something similar, of something as edgy, something as groundbreaking, I think that's a legitimate possibility, but it requires the resources to also go to people who can.
I mean, not that we ever want to be in this situation, but I think a lot of the like most exciting work that I've done was when we had like no money, because you're just sort of like, let's do the thing that we want to do however we can do it.
Yep.
And yeah, I hope that after discussing such a like specific framework of this like classic Broadway musical, that we might start to explore ways to honor shows like Strange Loop that might not come through, but to create our own. Or
Yeah. You have very limited resources of what you can create, because then what you end up with is like a really, really what matters. Like what is
very
what,
focused,
yeah.
dialed
And I
in.
think that's
Yeah.
such a great way of working when you take away resources of money and things. It's like, one, how passionate are you about it? But two, like you also feel like you're not beholden to anything. So the being risky and being whatever and like let's just do something that we love sometimes creates really magical stuff.
Yeah, it's like what's the sweet spot between like funding and creative pursuits.
Yeah.
I have so much to think about,
Yeah.
and I'm thrilled about
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
We want to squeeze in our
Yeah,
last
what's
question
that?
that we always ask.
Let's do it.
Ooh,
That we always ask our guests, and
peanut butter. Nope, sorry.
Bridgerton?
that's a really both good answers to the question that I'm about to ask. Actually, like spot on. You don't have to answer it now, but let me
now
ask
I'm
it
excited to hear the question.
to you. What is the most exciting thing happening in theater right now? It could be
Peanut butter!
and Bridgerton. It could be locally. It could be nationally, internationally. Whatever you think.
Just before the mics went on, we were talking about something that's really cool happening in the city that I don't think people are talking about enough. And that's two local companies, AA Battery and Sick and Twisted Theater, are producing a new original musical adaptation of Antigone that highlights and puts some focus on disabled performers and has original music from Winnipeg's own Mariachi Ghost. And it's just... It's the coolest thing, you guys.
Yeah.
Like, everyone should go see it.
Yes.
It's like twice.
I have to say, and maybe this is more of like an energy response, but I forgot how much I had missed the Fringe. And I have a nephew who's 11 who isn't at the age where he's like too cool for stuff yet.
Yeah.
So I took him to see your play, which he said was his favorite play. Please don't tell Ballad of Johnny Boy. I'll give you context.
will.
Oh, they heard it.
We love walk and talk.
Did
So
you
what
hear
happened
that, boys?
So I only was able to catch two shows, which were The Ballad of Johnny Boy and The Cause. And I took my nephew to both because they were both like incredibly different experiences. But I was like, oh, I think this is like kind of the thing that will like get him excited, because it's not that like sit there for 2.5 hours and watch like Dr. Zhivago the musical. I don't know. I'm just anyway.
Absolutely.
But so for me, that was like two really beautiful examples of like exciting, fast-paced, but like very different styles of storytelling. And I just loved both of them so much. But Dallas obviously really loved your play. So sorry, walk and talk.
We won.
But that's the kind of stuff that gets me really excited because, yeah, it's just wonderful. And I get to like meet people creatively when I see them do their own work.
Absolutely.
Whereas when you see people in a show that already exists, it's like, oh, they're wonderful, capable performers, you know, doing the thing. But it's, maybe it's not who they are entirely. And so it's wonderful to see people in their own work.
Ooh, I
That's
really
my
like
I love
that.
that. Meet
That
them
means-
creatively. That's such a really, that's a
really like
beautiful,
that.
beautiful little phrase. Okay, well, last thing is literally just like plugs of you have work coming up that you want people to come see,
that you're allowed to talk
that you're allowed
about.
to talk about.
I absolutely am. Everyone should come to Prairie Theater Exchange this Christmas season and see me, along with 5 of my closest friends, improvise a musical based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. This is Outside Joke. We're doing A Christmas Carol, Big Dickens Energy
Woo!
at PTE.
That sounds spicy.
Oh, it's going to be fun. It's going to be rowdy. It's going to be the most you're going to laugh this Christmas season.
Wow.
And you should also come and check out the Village Conservatory's live fundraiser on December 10th at Crescent Fort Rouge United Church. If you want to support the future of new musicals in Winnipeg, that's where to find the people who are doing them.
I am really thrilled that I get to be in the room to help facilitate the upcoming production of Charlie Brown at MTYP.
We got an MTYP mention.
Yay! Were we looking for one?
We mention them
you do every time.
We just love them
episode.
over there.
We
so-
all live there.
Yeah.
That's
We
why
essentially
we all
live
live
there,
there. So I'm really looking forward to being in the room for that. And then I will be choreographing Into the Woods at MTC
Amazing.
this winter. So I look forward to doing that. It's been a minute since I created movement from a storytelling perspective, so it's a wonderful challenge and I look forward to it.
Thank you
Okay.
so much for joining us.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks
What's
for
the
having
what?
us.
You sound
and
yeah.
we just spoke.
Have a little bit of optimism, like a rainbow through a small glass prism. We want to search, we want to look, to listen, to see what we find. Sure, we've got a lot of old traditions, but we're interested in your new renditions. Help us understand what we've been missing for all of this time. Rainbow Speaks, Rainbow Speaks.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Rainbow Speaks. Our hosts are Cuinn and Cuinn Joseph, and today's special guests were Paul DeGurse and Jillian Willems. For the digital studio, I'm Daphne Finlayson, your technical creative director, and our content creative director is Dutchess Cayetano. Music for the show is provided by Duncan Cox. This podcast was recorded and produced on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional home of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Metis Nation. We gratefully acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts in making this podcast possible. Thank you so much.